I don't know what to do anymore. I'm scared. I'm exhausted. And I think coming to Korea was the biggest mistake of my life.
Who gave you this number?
The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. and it wasn't supposed to be him on the other end. Julie Anderson was breaking, alone in her tiny Seoul apartment, hands trembling, tears blurring the screen. She meant to call her sister, the one who always picked up, always pulled her back from the edge. But in the panic, she dialed the wrong number. She didn't realize it yet. Voice cracking in the dark, she poured it all out. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm scared, I'm exhausted, and I think coming to Korea was the biggest mistake of my life. I can't keep pretending I'm okay. Dead silence. Not a hang-up, not awkward static. A heavy, intentional quiet that made her heart slam against her ribs. Then, a voice sliced through. Low. Controlled. Dangerous in that quiet, lethal way only someone who commands empires can sound. Who the hell gave you this number? Julie froze, breath trapped in her throat. 42 floors above the glittering Seoul skyline, in a shadowed penthouse, Kwon Hyun-woo set down his whiskey glass. He hadn't answered an unknown call in 6 years, not once. Tonight, something, maybe fate, maybe boredom, maybe the raw ache in her voice, made him pick up. He should have ended it right there. He didn't. And the woman on the line, the one who sounded like she was drowning, she didn't hang up either. One wrong call, one guarded billionaire, one moment that shattered both their worlds. This is Afro Korea Stories by Yem, where broken hearts collide with cold empires, where vulnerability meets unbreakable power, and where love sneaks in through the cracks no one saw coming. Besties, if you're ready for the slow burn tension, the cultural fire, the protective alpha moments, and the redemption that hits different, hit that like button. Drop a if you're already hooked. Share with your girls who need this vibe. And subscribe so you never miss when the next part drops. Because trust me, this story, it's just getting started. Stay tuned. Julie had been in Seoul for 11 weeks. She'd come for a 1-year contract position with a mid-size marketing firm. A chance to reset after a breakup that had hollowed her out. A job that paid just enough to feel like a fresh start, and a city that didn't know her name. She'd told herself it was brave. Most mornings, it just felt lonely. Her apartment was small and clean and cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd decorated it with a few photos from home, her mother's face, her niece's gap-toothed smile, a sunset she'd photographed in Atlanta the summer everything still felt possible. The photos helped. They also made it worse. The night she called the wrong number, she'd gotten a letter. Her landlord, through a terse translated email informed her that the building had been sold. New management, new terms. She had 60 days to renegotiate at triple her current rate or vacate. In Seoul's market, triple meant impossible. In Seoul's market, impossible meant starting over again. She'd sat on the floor of her kitchen and cried the ugly kind, snot and shaking shoulders and the particular despair of someone who has been strong for too long. She'd reached for her phone to call Naomi. She'd pressed the wrong name. And the man who answered had a voice like the deep end of something she wasn't prepared to swim in. Who gave you this number? She almost hung up. She should have hung up. Instead, her mouth, that traitorous, honest mouth, said, I think I dialed wrong. I'm sorry. I was trying to call my sister. Another pause. Longer this time. It's almost 3 a.m, he said. I know. Are you in danger? The question surprised her. Not, who are you, or don't call again, but that. Are you in danger? as if her answer mattered, as if he had any intention of doing something about it either way. "No," she said. "Just, no, I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." Julie laughed, a small broken sound. "I called a stranger at 3 a.m. to cry. I'm clearly not fine." More silence. Then, unexpectedly, "What happened?" She told him. She didn't know why. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because his voice was steady in a way that made her own chaos feel containable. She told him about the letter, about the rent, about being 29 and starting over in a city where she still couldn't order coffee without pointing at the menu. She told him she was embarrassed and exhausted, and that she missed her mother's cooking with a ferocity that felt almost physical. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, didn't try to fix it, the way men always tried to fix things before they really heard anything. He just listened. And when she finally ran out of words and sat in the quiet of her own confession, he said, "You'll figure it out." Not a platitude. The way he said it, flat, certain, without decoration, it landed like a fact. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because you called a stranger instead of falling apart alone. That's not weakness. That's strategy." Julie blinked in the dark. "Who are you?" she asked. The pause this time was different, measured, like he was deciding something. "Someone who answers wrong numbers at 3 a.m., apparently," he said. And then the line went quiet. She stared at her phone for a long time after. She didn't sleep well, but she slept. She found out who he was 8 days later. She wasn't looking for him. She was in a cafe near her office, laptop open, scrolling through relocation listings with the grim focus of someone accepting a sentence when the television mounted near the bar cut to a press conference. A man stepped up to the podium, tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly salary. Dark eyes, utterly still. The kind of face that had learned not to give anything away. The caption read, "Kwon Hyun-woo, CEO, KH Group." Julie's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She knew that voice. She'd recognize it anywhere. Low and unhurried, with that particular stillness underneath it, like a river that ran deep and cold and hid everything dangerous in its current. She'd spent 8 nights trying not to think about it. KH Group. She knew the name. Everyone in Seoul knew the name. Real estate, tech, infrastructure, hospitality. Kwon Hyun-woo had his fingerprints on half the skyline she saw from her office window. He was 34, famously private and reportedly as warm as a February morning in Siberia. She thought about the way he'd said "you'll figure it out" like it was simply true. She thought about how he'd asked if she was in danger before he asked anything else. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, but she recognized it. "I saw that your building sold to KH Group's residential division 6 months ago," the message read. "Your lease renegotiation notice is standard practice. It shouldn't have been sent without a meeting first. I've corrected it. Your current rate is locked for the duration of your contract." Julie read it 3 times. Then she typed back, "You looked me up." His reply came fast. "You called me." Her heart did something she didn't give it permission to do. She put the phone face down on the table and stared at the wall for a full minute. This, she told herself firmly, is not something you are going to do. She told herself that for the next 2 weeks. She told herself that when his messages came, sparse, never demanding, always oddly precise. A recommendation for a Korean language tutor he described as efficient. A note that a restaurant near her office had failed its health inspection. Small things, Specific things. The kinds of things that meant he was paying attention in ways she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to refuse. She told herself that the morning she arrived at her office to find a standing desk had been delivered. For your back, the card read, unsigned, which was somehow more unsettling than a signature. That this was not something she wanted. That men with that kind of power didn't notice women like her without wanting something in return. That she'd learned that lesson already and paid for it in ways she was still recovering from. She told herself all of it. And then he showed up at her office, not announced, not with fanfare. He simply appeared in the lobby of her building at 12:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, dressed like he owned the city, which she was beginning to realize he mostly did. And waited. Her colleague Priya grabbed her arm as they stepped off the elevator. "Julie, why is Kwon Hyun-woo standing in our lobby?" It wasn't a question, it was a declaration of emergency. Julie looked at him. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Like recognition, like relief, like a man who'd been waiting longer than 12 days. "He's here for me," Julie said quietly. Priya made a sound that was not entirely human. Julie crossed the lobby. Each step felt like a decision she wasn't finished making. She stopped 2 feet from him, close enough to confirm that he was exactly as composed in person as he'd sounded on the phone, and that something about his stillness made her want to find the edges of it. "You could have texted," she said. "I wanted to see if you'd run," he said. She held his gaze. "I don't run." His eyes moved over her face, unhurried, thorough, like he was cataloguing something he intended to keep. When they settled back on hers, the air between them tightened by 1 precise degree. "Lunch," he said. "Not a question either." Julie crossed her arms. "That's not how you ask someone to lunch." "No," he agreed. "It's how I tell them." She should have said no. She picked up her bag instead. The restaurant he took her to didn't have a sign. That was the first thing she noticed. No name above the door, no menu in the window, just a narrow entrance off a side street in Gangnam that looked like it led nowhere, and a host who materialized from nowhere and bowed like Kwon Hyun-woo's arrival was something the building had been holding its breath for. The second thing she noticed was that every person in the room looked up when he walked in, not the way people looked at celebrities with hunger, with phones raised. The way people looked at weather, at something that changed the atmosphere simply by being present. Conversations didn't stop, they just adjusted, quieted at the edges, made room. Julie kept her chin up and her expression neutral and told herself she was not impressed. She was absolutely impressed. They were seated in a private alcove near the back, a low table, cushioned seats, a paper screen that gave the illusion of solitude without fully delivering it. A server appeared and disappeared without a word exchanged. Tea arrived. Then food, small, precise, achingly beautiful plates she hadn't ordered and didn't recognize. "You should have asked what I like," she said. "I did," he said. "You told the barista at Park Cafe last Thursday that you wanted something that wasn't too spicy but had depth. I worked from there." Julie set down her chopsticks. "That's surveillance. That's attention," he said. And he said it so evenly, without apology or performance, that she didn't know whether to be alarmed or undone. She chose alarmed. Alarmed was safer. "Kwon Hyun-woo," she said, "I need you to understand something. Tell me. I am not a project. I'm not a charity case you fixed with a lease adjustment and a standing desk. I'm a person, and I'm not—" She stopped, reorganized. Whatever this is, I need you to know it's not going to go the way you think it is. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but deepened, like she'd said something that confirmed a calculation he'd already run. "How do you think I think it's going to go?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was, "I think you think I'll be grateful enough to be easy." She'd seen it before, men with power who performed generosity as a form of negotiation, who gave things in order to collect them later. But something about the way he was watching her, still attentive, with none of the impatience of a man waiting to get what he wanted, made her hesitate. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then don't assume," he said simply. "Eat." She ate. The food was extraordinary. She didn't tell him that, but he watched her take the third bite of a braised dish she couldn't name, and something in the set of his mouth shifted, and she understood that he already knew. Lunch lasted 2 hours. She didn't mean for it to. She had a 2 p.m. She let it slide. She told herself it was because the food was good, because it was easier to let the time pass than to engineer an exit. Not because he asked questions nobody had asked her in a long time, about her work, her actual work, the campaign strategy she'd been drafting for a client her firm kept underestimating, and listened to the answers with the focused attention of someone running no parallel agenda. Not because twice he almost smiled, and both times she found herself wanting to be the reason it completed. "Stop it," she told herself. She left at 2:23 p.m. He walked her to the street. They stood on the pavement in the thin autumn light, and she was acutely aware of how close he was. Not inappropriately close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cool air, close enough to catch something clean and expensive underneath it. "Thank you for lunch," she said. Professional, measured. "Julie." The way he said her name, just her name, nothing attached to it, made something in her chest contract. "What?" she said. Not really a question, more of a defense. "I'll see you again," he said. She looked up at him. His face gave away almost nothing, but his eyes, dark and direct and carrying something she didn't have a word for yet, gave away just enough. "You don't know that," she said. "I do," he said. And then he turned and walked back toward the waiting black car, and she stood on the pavement watching him go and hating herself a little for the direction her heart was beating. She saw him again 4 days later. This time she wasn't surprised. That was what bothered her. He'd texted that morning, brief, characteristically unpreambled. "There's an exhibition at the National Museum of Korea, Contemporary African Diaspora Artists. I thought you might want to see it." She stared at the message for 11 minutes. He'd thought of her, specifically. Not dinner at a restaurant designed to impress her, not another correction to her apartment lease. Something that was about who she actually was. Something that said, "I've been paying attention to you, not just to the problem of you." She typed, "I have plans tonight," which was a lie. Her plans were a bowl of ramyun and a video call with Naomi that she'd already postponed twice. His reply, "Tomorrow then." She almost typed no. She went on Saturday. The exhibition was extraordinary. Large-scale mixed media pieces that stretched across 2 gallery rooms, work by artists from Nigeria, Jamaica, Senegal, the UK, and 3 Korean African collaborators she'd never heard of but immediately wanted to follow. She moved through it slowly, the way she always did in galleries, letting things land before she analysed them. Hyun-woo moved through it differently, quietly. He didn't perform appreciation. didn't narrate or explain or try to demonstrate how cultured he was. He just watched her, and occasionally stopped beside her at a piece and said something low and precise that showed he'd actually looked, actually thought. In front of a large canvas, bold geometric shapes in deep burgundy and black, two figures whose features suggested both Yoruba and Korean influence, their hands nearly but not quite touching. He stood for a long time. "They're reaching for each other," Julie said. "Or letting go," he said. She looked at him. He was still looking at the painting. "Which do you think?" she asked. He turned. His eyes dropped to her mouth for exactly 1 second before returning to her eyes. That 1 second rewired something in her nervous system entirely. "I think," he said carefully, "that the artist wanted us to decide for ourselves." They stood there a beat too long. The gallery hummed with other voices and footsteps, but this particular square of space between them felt strangely private. Her pulse was doing something she didn't appreciate. "I should go," she said. "You keep saying that," he observed, "because I keep meaning it. Do you?" She looked at him directly, squared her shoulders. "Hyun-woo, I need you to be honest with me. What do you want?" He didn't hesitate. "To know you," he said. "That's all. For now, that's all. For now." 2 words doing enormous structural work. She should have walked out. She let him take her to dinner instead. Over the next 3 weeks, something shifted. She stopped bracing for what he wanted. Not because she trusted him fully. She didn't. Not yet. Not in the place where old damage lived. But because he kept failing to be what she expected. He didn't push. He didn't crowd. He arrived and paid attention and asked questions and answered hers with a directness that was almost disconcerting in a world full of men who deflected. He told her over cold noodles on a rainy Wednesday that he'd built KH Group from a single failing hotel his father had left him at 22. That the first 3 years he'd slept 4 hours a night and eaten at his desk and made decisions that still cost him sleep a decade later. She asked what kind of decisions. His jaw tightened slightly. The kind you make when you're young enough to think winning justifies anything. She didn't push, but she filed it away. She told him on a park bench while Seoul blazed gold around them that she'd moved here partly to prove something to herself after a relationship that had made her feel invisible for 2 years, that she'd thought distance would make her brave again. That some days it did. Some days Seoul still felt like a costume she hadn't grown into. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't look like someone who's ever been invisible." "You didn't know me then," she said. "No," he said, "but I know you now." The simplicity of it hit her somewhere undefended. She looked away at the trees. Her hands were in her lap. His were beside her on the bench, still close, not touching. She was aware of the exact distance between them with a specificity that felt almost medical. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. Not to him, really. To herself. "Yes," he agreed. She turned to look at him. He was already watching her with that dark, steady gaze that gave away nothing and somehow everything. "You're not going to tell me it isn't," she said. "No," he said. "I'm not going to lie to you." Something in her chest cracked open. Just slightly. Just at the seam. That night, alone in her apartment, she pressed her hand to her sternum and told herself she still had time to stop this. She was starting to suspect she didn't. The call came on a Thursday morning. Julie was at her desk, halfway through a presentation deck for a client pitch, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Not Hyun-woo's number. A different one, Seoul area code, clipped female voice on the other end, speaking English with the particular precision of someone who had learned it as a tool rather than a language. Miss Anderson, this is Park Soo-yeon, personal assistant to Chairman Kwon Sung-il. He would like to meet with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Julie set down her pen. I'm sorry, Chairman Kwon? Hyun-woo's father, the voice said. A pause, surgical in its timing. He's aware of the time you've been spending with his son. The call ended before she could respond. She sat very still for a moment. Outside her window, Seoul moved the way it always did, relentless, indifferent, gorgeous. She looked at her screen without seeing it. Then she picked up her phone and called Hyun-woo. He answered on the second ring. Julie, your father just had his assistant call me, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. He wants to meet tomorrow. Silence. Then, with a coldness she hadn't heard from him before, Don't go. Hyun-woo! He has no business contacting you. I'll handle it. I'm not a problem for you to handle, she said, quiet but firm. If he wants to meet me, I'd rather know what he has to say than wonder. Another silence. She could feel him deciding something on the other end of it. She'd learned to read his silences the way you learned to read weather. I'll come with you, he said. No, she said. I'll go alone. Julie, I'll call you after. She hung up before he could argue. Then she sat back in her chair and breathed through the thing in her chest that felt uncomfortably like dread. Chairman Kwon Sung-il received her in a private office in the KH Group headquarters tower. A floor below Hyun-woo's, which she suspected was deliberate. The room was all dark wood and controlled silence, the kind of space designed to communicate that power here was so established it no longer needed to announce itself. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, upright, wearing the kind of stillness that told her exactly where Hyun-woo had learned it. He looked at her the way people looked at things they'd already assessed and were merely confirming. He did not offer her tea. Miss Anderson, he said, you're perceptive. I'll be direct. Please, she said. My son has obligations that predate your acquaintance with him. A merger with the Shin family, the largest private infrastructure group in South Korea, has been in negotiation for 4 years. Shin Yuna is a capable woman from an appropriate family. The arrangement is not formal, but it is understood. Julie kept her face neutral. Her hands were folded in her lap and she did not let them tighten. I see, she said. Hyun-woo is not a man who entertains distractions, Chairman Kwon continued. The fact that he has made an exception suggests he is more affected than is convenient. I'm not asking you to dislike my son. I'm asking you to be realistic about what his world requires. She looked at him steadily. With respect, Chairman Kwon, your son is 34 years old. Yes, he said, and the decisions made at 34 echo for decades. Something in his voice, not cruel exactly, but absolute, told her this was not a conversation. It was a notification. She stood, smoothed her jacket. Thank you for your time, she said. She made it to the elevator before her hands started shaking. She didn't call Hyun-woo from the lobby. She walked 6 blocks first, in the cold, until the shaking stopped and something harder settled in its place. Then she found a cafe and sat in the window and ordered coffee she didn't drink and thought about what she actually wanted. The honest answer was terrifying. She was falling for him. Not in the giddy, untethered way of early attraction. She was past that, had been past it for weeks. This was the quieter, more dangerous kind. The kind where you started measuring his absence in your chest. Where his voice on the phone rearranged your nervous system. Where you caught yourself thinking, I should tell Hyun-woo about things you saw and felt and noticed, because he'd become the person you wanted to tell. She'd been here before. Not with him. Never with someone like him. But in the territory of feeling too much for someone who lived inside a world with rules she didn't fully see. She knew how that ended. Her phone buzzed. Where are you? Not a question. She almost smiled despite herself. A cafe, she typed. I'm fine. His reply came in under 10 seconds. Which cafe? She looked out the window, told him. He was there in 14 minutes. She knew because she watched the door. She watched him come through it. Coat, controlled expression, eyes scanning the room until they found her. And she watched something in his face change when he did. A release of tension so slight anyone else would have missed it. He sat across from her, looked at her face, his jaw tightened. What did he say? Hyun-woo said. She told him, all of it. She watched his expression as she spoke, the coldness that moved through it, the muscle in his jaw working. The way his hands on the table went very still in the way she'd learned meant he was furious and choosing not to show it. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Shin Yuna, Julie said carefully. Is there something I should know? No, he said, flat, certain. There is nothing between us. There never has been. My father negotiates with people's lives the way he negotiates contracts, and he has done it since I was 12 years old. He paused. I'm sorry he contacted you. Don't apologize for him, she said. Just tell me the truth. What is this? She gestured between them. Because I need to know if I'm something you're doing in the space between the life your father has planned for you or... Julie. His voice stopped her. He leaned forward. His hand moved across the table and covered hers. The first time he'd touched her with intention, not accident, not proximity. And the warmth of it moved up her arm and landed somewhere central. You are not a space between things, he said, low and deliberate. You're not a distraction, or an exception, or a rebellion against my father. Do you understand me? She looked at him. His eyes were completely serious. I'm not going to be easy to be with, she said. Her voice was steady. I'm going to push back when I think you're wrong. I'm not going to shrink to fit your world. And whatever your father thinks I should be realistic about, I need you to know I make my own decisions. I know, he said, and the way he said it. Like her difficulty was not a warning but a fact he'd already accounted for and decided toward. Broke something open in her that she'd been guarding for months. She turned her hand over under his. Didn't pull away. They sat like that in the window of the cafe while Seoul moved past them, and she told herself she'd made no decision yet, knowing perfectly well that she had. That night he took her to his penthouse for the first time. Not with intent, or not only with intent. She'd asked to see it, which surprised them both. He'd paused at her door when he dropped her home, and she'd said, "Show me where you live," and something in his face had shifted in a way she felt in her stomach. The penthouse was not what she expected. She'd braced for cold grandeur, glass and sharp angles, and the aesthetic of a man who'd turned himself into a monument. There were elements of that. But there were also books, stacked in the casual disorder of someone who actually read them. A low couch, worn soft from use, a kitchen that showed evidence of cooking, a view of Seoul at night so overwhelming she stopped in front of it and forgot to speak. "It's beautiful," she said. He was standing slightly behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against her back. Close enough that when she turned, there was almost no space between them. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The city blazed behind the glass, and neither of them moved, and the air between them was so charged it had weight. "Hyun-woo," she said, a warning or an invitation. Even she wasn't sure. His hand came up and touched her jaw. Just that. Fingertips, barely contact, and her breath went shallow immediately. His eyes moved over her face with the same careful attention he gave everything. Reading, measuring, arriving at something. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. She didn't. When he kissed her, it was slow and deliberate and devastating. The kiss of a man who had been waiting long enough to know exactly what he wanted and was in no hurry now that he had it. Her hands found his chest. His found her waist, drawing her closer with a certainty that made her feel like she'd been falling toward this specific moment since 2:47 a.m. on a night she'd dialed the wrong number. Seoul glittered 42 floors below. The rest of the world could wait. The morning after was quiet in the way that meant everything. Julie woke to pale Seoul light coming through floor-to-ceiling glass and the specific disorientation of being somewhere beautiful and unfamiliar. She lay still for a moment, cataloguing. The weight of expensive linen, the distant sound of the city, the warmth beside her that meant he hadn't moved away in the night. She turned her head. Hyun-woo was already awake, lying on his back, one arm behind his head, looking at the ceiling with the focused stillness of someone running calculations. He sensed her looking and turned. His eyes in the morning light were different, softer at the edges, unguarded in a way she suspected very few people ever saw. "You're thinking," she said. "I'm always thinking," he said. "What about?" A pause. "Whether you'll be here when I come back from the bathroom." The honesty of it, undecorated, slightly raw, landed in the center of her chest. "I'll be here," she said. Something moved across his face. Not relief exactly. Something older than relief. He brought her coffee in bed, black, which was wrong, and she told him so, and watched his expression shift through what she was beginning to recognize as his version of embarrassed. He went back to the kitchen and came back with milk and the smallest shadow of a smile she'd ever seen on a man who clearly believed smiling was a resource to be conserved. She filed it away with all the other small things she was collecting about him. They ate breakfast at his kitchen island. Fruit, toast, something warm and savory she couldn't name, in the comfortable quiet of two people discovering they don't need to fill every silence. She was acutely aware of him, of the way he moved in his own space, unhurried, precise, completely at ease in a way he never quite was in public, where he wore his power like armor. Here it was just him, just this. This is when it gets dangerous, she thought. Not the night before. This. Morning light and coffee and the way he refilled her cup without asking because he'd already noticed when it was low. She left at 10. He walked her to the elevator and stood in the doorway watching her go, and she made herself not look back until the doors were almost closed. In that last second she did. And he was still there, shoulder against the doorframe, watching her with a dark and steady gaze. And the doors closed, and she breathed out slowly all the way down 42 floors. Stop falling, she told herself. Her chest ignored her completely. She told Naomi that night over video call. Naomi, sharp, protective, the kind of sister who loved you loudest when she thought you were about to make a mistake, was quiet for a long time after Julie finished. "He's a billionaire," Naomi said finally. Yes. Korean billionaire. In Seoul. Whose father already tried to run you off. That's accurate. Julie. Naomi's voice was careful. You know I support you in everything. I was there when Marcus spent 2 years making you feel like background noise. I know you know how to read a room. A pause. But I also know you, and I know that voice you're using right now. That's not the voice of someone who's being casual. I know, Julie said quietly. So what are you going to do? She looked at her hands. I don't know yet. Okay, Naomi said. Then be careful. Not scared. I didn't say scared, just careful. Julie nodded. I'm trying. After she hung up, she sat in the dark of her apartment for a long time. Naomi wasn't wrong. None of the sensible thoughts were wrong. Chairman Kwon wasn't wrong either, in the purely structural sense. There were 100 reasons this was complicated, and most of them were real. But then she thought about his hand covering hers in that cafe, the flatness in his voice when he said you are not a space between things, the way he'd gone back to fix her coffee. She picked up her phone and typed, I got home safe. His reply 30 seconds later, I know. I had someone watch the building until you were inside. She stared at it, then typed, that's both protective and invasive, and we're going to talk about the difference. His reply, tomorrow. Despite everything, she smiled. Tomorrow arrived with complications. She got to her office to find her project lead, Daniel, a precise, ambitious man who'd been angling for the senior campaign director position Julie had quietly been building toward, had submitted her client strategy deck to the firm partners under his own name. Her work, her research, her structure, her writing, his name on the cover. She found out at 9 a.m. she was in the partner meeting by 9:15, presenting her own work from memory, point by point, with the composure of someone who had decided that fury was a resource best spent later. The partners looked between her and Daniel with a particular discomfort of people watching a situation resolve itself faster than they'd anticipated. By 10 a.m., the attribution had been corrected. Daniel had been quietly moved to another account. The senior director conversation had been opened. She walked back to her desk and sat down and let herself shake for exactly 90 seconds. Then she called Hyun-woo. Tell me something good, she said when he answered. A beat. You want good, or you want to tell me what happened first? Both, in that order. The museum is showing a new photography series next week. I thought we could go. A pause. Now, tell me. She told him. He listened. That particular focused silence of his, the one that meant full attention. And when she finished, he said, Did you handle it? Yes, she said. I know. I'm asking so you can say it. She closed her eyes briefly. I handled it. Good, he said, simply, completely. You didn't need me to? No, she said. But I wanted to tell you. The silence that followed was warm. 3 days later, the first photograph appeared. A gossip site. The kind that served Seoul's business elite with the particular appetite of people who found power romantic, published a set of images. Hyun-woo and Julie leaving the National Museum. Hyun-woo and Julie at the cafe on the day he'd come to find her after his father's meeting. One she hadn't known was taken, the two of them on that park bench, her looking away at the trees, him looking at her, and the distance between their hands, almost but not quite touching, somehow more intimate than contact would have been. The caption read, KH Group heirs unlikely companion, who is the American woman changing Kwon Hyun-woo's schedule. Her phone filled up inside of an hour. colleagues, a journalist she didn't know, 2 numbers she didn't recognize. She silenced it, opened the article, read it with the practiced neutrality of someone refusing to be ambushed by their own feelings. Unlikely companion. She turned the phrase over, set it down. Hyun-woo called before she finished the article. "I've seen it," she said before he could speak. "My PR team is—" "Don't issue a statement," she said. A pause. "Julie, I mean it. Don't minimize it. Don't explain it away. Don't manage it like it's a crisis." Her voice was steady, but there was heat underneath it. "If you're embarrassed, I'm not embarrassed." The force of it stopped her. "I'm angry that someone was watching you without your knowledge. That's different." She breathed. "Okay. I want to see you tonight," he said. "I know." "Is that a yes?" "It's a give me today. I need today." Another silence. She could feel him wanting to push and choosing not to. "Tonight," he said. "Whenever you're ready." She was ready at 8. He opened the penthouse door and looked at her. Coat still on, hair still wind-tangled from the walk, jaw still carrying the remnants of a complicated day. And something in his face did the thing it did that she was running out of ways to resist. That opening. That involuntary softening that only happened when it was her. She walked in. He closed the door. She turned. "I need you to know," she said, "that I don't care about the article, not in the way they want me to care. I'm not ashamed of this." "Neither am I," he said. "But I need you to understand what it means for me to be visible in your world," she continued. "I'm a black woman in Seoul. The way people look at us, the assumptions they make about what I am to you, I live in that. You pass through it. There's a difference." He was very still, listening. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "I'm asking you to see it." "I see it," he said. Quiet. Certain. "I should have said that sooner." She looked at him for a long moment. The city was dark behind the glass and the penthouse was warm, and he was standing there with his hands at his sides, looking at her like she was the most important thing in the room, and she felt the last of the day's armor come down. She crossed the space between them. His arms came around her before she'd fully arrived, certain, tight, his chin dropping to the top of her head, and she pressed her face against his chest and let herself be held. His heartbeat was steady and fast, both at once, and she thought, he was worried about me today. He didn't show it the way other men showed things, but it was there. She could feel it in how tightly he held her, in the way he breathed out slowly when she didn't pull away. "Don't disappear on me," he said into her hair. Low, private, as close to exposed as she'd heard him get. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. The second time was slower than the first. Less discovery, more declaration. The kind of intimacy that happened when two people had stopped pretending they weren't falling and decided to fall on purpose. Seoul could have burned down outside those windows. Neither of them would have noticed. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday, the way the worst things always did. Quietly, dressed like something ordinary. Julie was working late alone in the office, the city dark outside her window when she got the email. No sender name. Just an address made of random characters and a subject line that read, "Things you should know about Kwon Hyun-woo." She should have deleted it. She opened it. Inside were documents, financial records, internal memos, photographs. Some she couldn't fully interpret. Dense corporate language, transaction figures with too many zeros, names she didn't recognize. But some she could. a land acquisition in Incheon 7 years ago that had displaced 400 families from a residential district to make way for a KH Group development, legal, technically, documented complaints suppressed through settlement agreements with non-disclosure clauses. A building inspector paid, a city official compensated for approvals that came faster than they should have. Not mafia, not blood on hands, but not clean either. The kind of decision, she thought, that a 27-year-old makes when he thinks winning justifies anything. She sat with it for a long time. She didn't call him that night. She told herself she needed to think. What she actually needed was to locate the place inside herself where she stood, what she could hold, what she couldn't, where her own moral line drew itself in permanent ink. She thought about what he'd said at that first dinner, decisions that still cost me sleep a decade later. She thought about the way he'd said it, not performing guilt, not minimizing, carrying it. She thought about who he was now versus who he'd been then. She thought about the fact that loving someone was not the same as excusing them, that she could hold both his darkness and his growth without having to choose which one was real. She also thought, someone sent me this, someone wanted me to see it, and that someone is not done. She confronted him the next evening. She showed up at the penthouse without texting first, her own small act of disruption. And when he opened the door and saw her face, he went immediately still. "What happened?" he said. She walked in, handed him her phone with the email open. She watched him read it, watched his jaw tighten, watched the controlled expression pull tighter over something that was genuinely difficult. He scrolled through in silence. When he finished, he set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood with both hands flat on the surface, looking at nothing. "Incheon," she said. "Yes." "You knew about the families?" A pause. "Yes." She waited. He turned. His face was stripped of its usual control, not broken but exposed in a way she'd only seen in moments of complete privacy. "I was 27, and I was trying to prove something to my father, and I told myself the settlements were fair. They weren't. The NDAs were. I knew what they were for." He stopped. "I've spent 6 years trying to build something that doesn't require that kind of transaction. It doesn't undo it." "No," she said, "it doesn't. Are you leaving?" Direct. No performance around the fear of it. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm deciding," she said honestly. "I'm not someone who walks away from hard things just because they're hard. But I'm also not someone who stays somewhere her values can't breathe." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." "I have questions," she said. "Real ones. About who you are now versus who you were. And I need real answers, not managed ones." "Ask," he said. She asked. For 2 hours, she asked, and he answered, sometimes with difficulty, sometimes with the specific flatness of a man forcing himself past the instinct to protect his own image, but always truthfully. She could tell the difference between his managed voice and his real one by now. She listened for the real one. By the end of it, she hadn't absolved him, but she understood him. And understanding, she was realizing, was its own kind of intimacy. "Someone sent that email," she said finally. "Someone who wanted to damage this." His eyes sharpened. "I know." "Who?" "I have a suspicion," he said carefully. "Tell me." He looked at her. Shin Jae-won. She recognized the name. Shin Yuna's brother. He runs the Shin family's strategic acquisitions. He's been resistant to the merger talks, stalling. "If my father believes I'm distracted, if he believes this..." He gestured between them, is a liability. He pushes harder for the Shin arrangement. The merger goes through. Jae-won gets everything he's been positioned for. So destabilizing us destabilizes you, she said. Yes. And your father? His jaw tightened. My father would call this morning's email a gift. She stood, moved to the window. Seoul sprawled below, vast and glittering and indifferent. And she thought about being a piece on someone else's board, about how quickly a woman could become a variable in a powerful man's calculations. She thought about how Hyun-woo had never once made her feel like a variable. I'm not going anywhere, she said to the window. But you need to deal with Jae-won and your father. And I need to know you're dealing with them as someone who's chosen me, not as a side effect of choosing yourself. She felt him cross the room before she heard him. His hands came to her shoulders, steady, warm, and he turned her gently until she was facing him. I chose you, he said. That is not a side effect of anything. She looked up at him. His face was completely open. No armor, no management, just him, standing in the exposure of it. Then prove it, she said softly. He moved fast. Whatever Kwon Hyun-woo was, when the world tried to threaten something he loved. And she understood now, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that she was something he loved. He was precise, surgical. He didn't rage. He planned. Within 48 hours, he'd traced the email origin through his security team to a server linked to Shin Jae-won's personal assistant. Within 72 hours, he'd arranged a meeting with the Shin family's board that did not include his father. He walked in alone, laid the evidence of Jae-won's interference on the table, and ended 4 years of merger negotiation in 20 minutes. Julie wasn't there. She found out after. You ended a 4-year deal, she said on the phone. It was never a deal I wanted, he said. Your father. My father will adapt, he said. He always does. She was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? A pause. Ask me that again tonight. She was at the penthouse by 7. He opened the door looking like a man who had walked through something difficult and come out the other side intact, but tired. That specific exhaustion that lived behind the eyes, the kind no sleep fully fixed. She looked at him and felt the full weight of what he'd done settle in her chest. She took his face in both hands. He closed his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. For being here. She understood that was what he meant. For still being here. Come sit down, she said. They sat on his couch with the city blazing outside, and she tucked herself against him, and he pulled her close in that way he had, complete, instinctive, like she was something he'd spent years not knowing he was looking for. And they stayed like that for a long time without speaking. She thought about the email, about Incheon, about Chairman Kwon's cold office and Naomi's careful voice and every sensible reason she'd catalogued for keeping distance. She thought about this, his heartbeat under her hand, the way his tension slowly drained the longer she stayed. I love you, she said. She hadn't planned it. It arrived fully formed, rising from somewhere too honest to govern. He went very still. Then his arms tightened around her. His lips pressed to the top of her head, slow, deliberate, the kind of contact that meant more than its components. Say it again, he said, low and rough at the edges. She lifted her head and looked at him. His eyes were dark and open and completely undone. I love you, she said again, steady, certain. He kissed her like it was an answer, like it was the only answer he'd been building towards since a phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, and he made the decision that changed everything. The third time was nothing like the first two. Not discovery, not declaration. Something quieter and more permanent than both. The intimacy of people who have chosen each other through the difficult parts and arrived together at something that doesn't need a name because it already has one. Seoul burned gold outside the glass. Inside, everything was warm. Chairman Kwon Hyun-woo requested a meeting with his son 10 days later. Hyun-woo told Julie about it the morning it was scheduled. Over breakfast at his kitchen island, coffee made correctly now, a small domestic fact that still made something warm move through her chest when she noticed it. He told her the way he told her most things, directly without softening the edges. He wants to discuss the Shin dissolution, he said. And you. Me, specifically. You, specifically. She looked at him over her cup. What are you going to say? He met her eyes. Everything. She didn't wait at the penthouse. That wasn't who she was. She didn't pace in beautiful rooms waiting to find out what powerful men had decided about her life. She went to work. She finished the senior campaign director proposal she'd been building for 3 weeks. The one that reframed their entire approach to the Korean luxury market using research she'd gathered herself, arguments she'd constructed alone, a strategy sharp enough that even Daniel, reassigned, diminished, still present, had stopped pretending not to notice her. She submitted it at 2 p.m. At 2:17 p.m. her project lead called her into his office and told her the partners had approved it on the spot. Effective immediately. She walked back to her desk and sat down and felt something settle. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but deeply. The particular satisfaction of a thing earned without compromise. Her phone buzzed. Hyun-woo. It's done. Come tonight. I have something to tell you. She stared at the message, read it 3 times. His texts were always spare. He was a man who treated words like capital, spent only what the moment required. But I have something to tell you was doing a great deal of work in very few syllables. She typed back, good done or bad done. His reply, come and find out. She put her phone face down and made herself finish the afternoon. He met her at the elevator. That was the first sign. He never met her at the elevator. He opened the door when she knocked, a small distinction that meant nothing and somehow meant everything. He was in a dark sweater, no jacket, the version of him that only existed inside this space, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, quieter than his usual quiet. Something resolved in it. How did it go? She said. Come in, he said. She came in. The penthouse was lit, warm and low, and on the kitchen island there was food. Real food, multiple dishes, the evidence of actual cooking rather than ordered delivery. She stopped and looked at it, and looked at him. You cooked, she said. I attempted, he said. Sit down. She sat. He brought the food to the table. Careful, deliberate. With the focused attention he gave everything, and sat across from her, and for a moment just looked at her, like he was organizing something, running final checks on a decision already made. Tell me, she said softly. My father, he began, has spent 30 years building KH Group as a dynasty, not a company, a dynasty, which means every decision, including personal ones, has been made in service of that structure. He paused. I understood that logic for a long time. I operated inside it. The Incheon development was part of that logic. The Shin arrangement was part of it. His eyes came to hers. You are not compatible with that logic." Her heart was beating very carefully. "I told my father today that the merger is permanently closed, that I will not be entering any arrangement with the Shin family or any other family as a business transaction, that KH Group's next chapter will be built on terms I set, not inherited ones." A pause. He was not pleased. "I imagine not," she said quietly. "He told me I was throwing away everything he'd built for an unsuitable woman." His voice was even. "I told him that the word unsuitable told me everything I needed to know about what he'd built, and that I was no longer interested in maintaining it." Julie set down her chopsticks. "Hyun-woo," she said, the full weight of it landing. "That's your father." "Yes," he said. "He's also wrong." He leaned forward slightly. "I am not my father's architecture. I spent 12 years trying to be, and it cost me things I can't recover. I'm not spending the next 12 the same way." She looked at him across the table. The food between them was getting cold, and neither of them was eating, and the city outside was doing its usual magnificent indifferent blazing, and she was thinking about 2:47 a.m. and a wrong number, and the voice that asked, "Are you in danger?" before it asked anything else. "What are you saying?" she said. Even though she knew, she needed to hear it. He reached into his pocket. She went absolutely still. What he placed on the table was not a ring box. Not yet. Not exactly. It was a key. A single key on a simple steel ring set on the table between their plates with the quiet certainty of a man who had thought about this thoroughly and arrived here on purpose. "I'm not asking you to change your life," he said. "You have a career you've built here, work that matters, a self you came to Seoul to find. I'm not asking you to fold that into mine." His eyes were steady on hers. "I'm asking to build something new. With you. Here or wherever you need it to be. A life that fits both of us, not one that requires either of us to disappear inside it." She looked at the key. "That's the penthouse," she said. "And the Mapo apartment I had my team find last week," he said. "Quieter neighborhood, better light, office space built in case you want your own space that's still near." A pause. "I know you don't run, but I also know you need room. I'm trying to give you both." She picked up the key. It was warm from his pocket. She held it in her palm and felt the weight of it. Small, specific, entirely him. "You found me an apartment," she said. "I found you options," he said carefully. "The choice is yours." She looked up. His face was open and controlled at once. The particular combination she'd come to understand meant he was afraid and refusing to hide it. "I love you," she said. Third time now. Each time more settled than the last. He breathed out, slow, complete, like he'd been holding something in his chest since the elevator. "I love you," he said, the first time, low and certain and so unadorned it was more convincing than any declaration she'd ever heard. She stood up from the table, walked around to his side. He turned in his chair and she took his face in both hands the way she had 10 days ago, when he'd come back from something hard and needed to be reminded he was home, and he looked up at her with those dark eyes that had stopped pretending they didn't need her. "Yes," she said. "To which part?" he said. Almost a smile. "The real one. The one she'd learned to look for." "All of it," she said. "The penthouse, the Mapo apartment with good light, building something that fits both of us. All of it." He stood, slowly, the way he did everything that mattered, with full attention, no hurry. He was tall above her and warm and solid, and when his arms came around her it was with the completeness she'd felt the first time and every time since, the feeling of arriving somewhere she hadn't known she was heading. "I should have answered wrong numbers years ago," he said against her hair. She laughed, a real one, full and unguarded. She felt him smile into her hair at the sound of it. 6 months later, Julie Anderson stood in the Mapo apartment with afternoon light coming through exactly the windows he'd described, her laptop open on the built-in desk, a campaign deck on screen that was going to change how 3 major Korean brands thought about global diversity marketing. On the wall above the desk was the photograph from the National Museum exhibition, the 2 figures, hands almost touching, that she'd bought the week after they first saw it together. She'd decided it was reaching. Her phone buzzed. Hyun-woo, dinner. 7, I'm cooking. She smiled at the screen, typed back, define cooking. His reply, I'm attempting. Wear something you don't mind getting flour on. She laughed out loud in the empty apartment. She was still smiling when she arrived at the penthouse at 7 to find him in an apron, an actual apron which she was going to think about for a very long time. And something that smelled extraordinary on the stove, and a small box on the kitchen island that he was very deliberately not drawing attention to. She noticed immediately. She walked over and looked at him. Hyun-woo! Eat first, he said, stirring something. Kwon Hyun-woo! He set down the spoon, turned, picked up the box and held it without opening it, looking at her with the expression she now understood was his version of completely undone, still on the surface, every carefully constructed wall dissolved behind his eyes. I had a speech, he said. What happened to it? She said. Her voice had gone soft without her permission. You walked in, he said simply. He opened the box. The ring was not ostentatious. Nothing about him ever was in the ways that mattered. It was elegant and precise and had a warmth to it that she recognized as intentional, chosen, nothing delegated. It looked like something he'd thought about. I am not an easy man, he said. I know that. I have a complicated past and a difficult father and a world that will always have opinions about us. He held her gaze. But I have not been the same since 2:47 a.m. when a stranger called me by accident and talked to me like I was just a person. You did that. You kept doing that. A pause. I want the rest of my life to be something you helped build. If you'll let me. Julie's eyes were bright. She thought about the girl who'd sat on a kitchen floor in Seoul and cried because she was tired and scared and had made a mistake pressing the wrong number. She thought about how that mistake had walked her directly into the rest of her life. She took the ring from the box herself, held it out to him. Put it on, she said. His hands were steady. Hers were not quite. The ring slid home and she looked at it on her finger and felt something complete, not the end of something, the beginning of everything that came after. He pulled her in. She went. Outside, Seoul blazed gold and relentless and magnificent. 42 floors below, the city moved the way it always did, without waiting, without pausing, without caring about any one story among its millions. But this one was theirs, a wrong number, a voice in the dark, a man who asked are you in danger before he asked anything else, and a woman who'd been brave enough to answer. Love, it turned out, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just picked up the phone. The end.